Thank you very much for joining the Knowledge Forum, Historical Overview and Future Perspective of Japan Development Corporation. My name is Tanaka Akihiko, President of JICA. This year marks the 70th anniversary of Japan's Official Development Assistance or ODA, and today we'd like to look back the history of Japan's development corporation, as well as the perspective for the future of the development corporation. And once British historian diplomat E.H. Carr stated in his book that his history is an unending dialogue between the present and the past, which is a very famous phrase. And he also stated that the past throws light on the future and the future throws light on the past. That is what he stated. And he stated that in a very old book, but I believe that is true. And these words hold true for Japan Development Corporation. Japan's ODA is perhaps the most important measure among Japan's post-World War diplomatic policies. Japan's Development Corporation is engraved with the history of Japan developing as a non-Western nation, as well as the history of rebuilding itself after the war while receiving support from the international society. Japan started ODA in 1954, 9 years after the end of World War II. This was 10 years before Japan joined OECD. The ODA then was conducted along with the post-war reparations to Vietnam, the Philippines, and then Burma. To regain the lost trust in the international society, Japan has mainly provided ODA in Southeast Asia. And then in 1950s and 1990s, Japan supported various projects in Branches River development in Indonesia, or Eastern Seaboard development in Thailand, or the development in Cerrado region of Brazil. And through tenacious support, we were able to achieve a great result. And while doing so, we paid great attention to the infrastructure support, which will be the basis for economic development, as well as the stance of Japan to focus on development of human resources and development of the country in the slogan, as well as the stance to pay respect to self-help of partner countries. These have been maintained for a very long time. As a result, Japan has been regarded the country strongly trusted by the international society. In addition to ODA, Japan's initiatives include the proposal of the concept of free and open Indo-Pacific, as well as the contribution to the establishment of CPTPP, as well as measures against infectious diseases, as well as activities to ensure reliable and free data distribution. By taking the lead in the international agenda, I believe that the international influence of Japan has become much more significant compared to the past. The international influence is based on trust from other nations, which has been developed through the diplomacy of the government and development cooperation, as well as all the stakeholders, including companies and NGOs, in an all-Japan manner. When we take a look at what the world is today, what various challenges have become diversified and complicated. We are seeing natural disasters caused by abnormal climate change, abnormal climate, and food crisis ensuing, as well as Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We are seeing unprecedented complex crisis. Under such circumstances, what should Japan's development cooperation be in the future? What should we maintain? What should we change? The answers to these questions will be provided by looking into the history of development cooperation. JICA Ogata Sadako Research Institute for Peace and Development has been engaging with the task of looking back the history. Our book was published about 10 years ago in celebrating the 60th anniversary of ODA, Professor Kato Hiroshi, Dr. John Page, and Professor Shimomori Yasutami mentioned that there are two important values coming from Japan's assistance aid. That is, one is trusting in receiving countries, the other is self-help, or effort to help oneself. And to further develop these results, we asked the people at the forefront in this field, and now we are publishing the book series, Reconsidering the History of Japan's Development Cooperation. In each phase of ODA initiation, expansion, and maturity, what kind of views policymakers had, and the counterparts and the beneficiaries and partner countries, how they regarded the development cooperation of Japan, and how they made them as theirs. And this book series squarely faces these questions by collecting various historical materials and conducting interviews with stakeholders. And today's panel discussion will involve some of the authors for the book series. They will be joining as a member in the panel discussion. And in the Development Cooperation Charter revised last June, the concept of human security, where people can be free from fear and deficiency and live with dignity, has been regarded as a fundamental philosophy which underlies in every development cooperation of Japan. And also co-creation, the concept where all the stakeholders, including the partner governments and private companies and research institutions and local governments, get together to co-create countermeasures and solutions. And this is an extension of a good tradition of Japan's development international cooperation, in that we by listening to the people in the partner countries and respect their wills, as well as conduct activities in the trust, self-help, and human resource development. I sincerely hope this forum will be used as the place for co-creation. I appreciate that discussions. Thank you for your kind attention. Dr. Tanaka, thank you very much for your opening remark. Next, we'd like to move to the keynote speech. We'd like to invite Professor Kato Hiroshi, Vice President of International University of Japan, the significance of exploring the history of development cooperation, the future of development cooperation, and ODA. Professor Kato, the floor is yours. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kato, International University of Japan. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk to you about this topic. This theme I was asked to talk about is the significance of exploring the history of development cooperation, and based on that, we'd like to think about the futures of the development cooperation or ODA. So please go to the next slide. This is a matrix for my presentation. The two on the left, these are the topics I was given to talk. And one factor I added to this framework is that not just discussing these topics, but to make it more concrete. What are we supposed to do? That is something I'd like to touch on in my presentation. The first one, what key lessons can be learned by reviewing the historical evolution of development cooperation and looking back? There are concepts I'd like to focus on. That is national interest. That is something I'd like to focus on in my presentation. In assistance field, there are discussions about national interest. In the past, when ODA Charter was established, we had a discussion about whether to use the term national interest. But recently, in the development assistance of Japan, no matter what the definition of national interest, but in pursuing national interest itself, that is something we reached an agreement and a consensus. And I respect the person and economist for development, Mr. Iran Katsumi, and thanks. As this is a project conducted by the government that needs to be focused on boosting the national interest, according to him. And I strongly agree with this phrase. But what kind of national interest we need to pursue, that is something we should have clear understanding. And along with that direction, we need to think about to what extent we boosted the national interest of Japan. That is something we need to have very clear perspective about. Today, for the sake of discussion, I'd like to raise the national interest to Japan as well as a global common interest where Japan contributes to international global society and then the benefit coming back to Japan. These are the two types of national interest I'd like to talk in my discussion. The first one, the top box, the contribution to the national interest of Japan itself. Today I don't have much time, so I will be rushing through my explanation, but as President Dr. Tanaka has mentioned, after the post-World War period, the development cooperation activities and related initiatives have been contributing to enhancing national interest, starting from reparation in the post-war period, but to restore the relationship with Southeast Asian countries. And in doing so, at the initial phase, this measure was utilized. And to rebuild the devastated economy, we use this measure, a tool. And in the high economic growth period, for us to redevelop Japan's economy, we had to conduct economic cooperation activities. That is the major discussion the government of Japan had. And in the book of Professor Shimomura, I described this in detail in that book. And in 70s oil shock or soy shock, we saw then, in terms of Japan's resource and foods, we identified the vulnerabilities of what we have. And therefore, ODA has been utilized for that purposes. And in the 1980s, we saw a lot of trade surplus and how we can make good use of the surplus, as well as try to address the trade conflict between Japan and the U.S. The ODA was utilized as a tool for coordination in line with the Japan-U.S. relationship. And then this was also used as a tool to execute responsibility as a developed countries. And then during 2000s, mainly, Japan went into a long-term stagnation. And to revitalize the economy, the development cooperation was utilized, as you're all aware. And these are about some visible aspects to the national interest. But on top of this, not only the visible ones, there are a invisible contribution as well. What I'd like to highlight here is the Japanese society and the human resources of Japan. This activity offered initiatives and opportunities for them to go outside. In the past, Japan has an image of Fujiyama or geisha, but then the automotives and home appliances, many people knew about Japan from these items, from these things, but just relying on the private activities will not enhance the understanding on Japan across the globe. Through ODA and development cooperation, we have achieved a great improvement in the national recognition of Japan. By the way, when we take a look at the numbers and statistics of JICA, we have about 50,000 Japan Overseas Cooperation volunteers, and experts sent to outside Japan 200,000 people. And the people visiting developing countries as researchers, the number has been 300,000 people. It may be just a fraction of numbers given the total population of Japan, but these numbers of people visiting developing countries and representing Japan to do their job, this is a great initiative we conduct for Japan.
And also as a way of express Japan and Japanese in our sphere, the World Bank So we once had a full-fledged debate with World Bank. And I believe when Shimomura-san was in OECF, he was leading this conversation. So he raised some points of discussion in this important dialogue. And in the diplomatic channel, through public channel, and also through the public sector, we were able to use this third channel as the key tool to express Japan and Japanese on top of the private and public existing channels. And to summarize, if I may, so this has the development cooperation has been serving as an important tool as part of our diplomacy. And I believe no one would argue this point. Since this is the way of means of diplomacy, so we would like to cherish the value of it and continue to make the most of it. So if we do not pay attention to this tool, that means we are undermining the value of it by ourselves, and it's not a wise way to treat that. And I've been in this sphere to provide aid to developing countries. And looking back on our activities, it's not just the charity or giving money, but this can also be considered as the future investment for Japan. And that's how I would like to summarize my point. And I believe the things that I will mention from now will be well and widely understood by people in this sphere. But I'm not sure if the ordinary people also have the similar view on this. So if the taxpayers fully understand and fully convinced with this, then it may be easier to secure a budget in the government funding. So the roles and the value of the development cooperation is not fully understood by the taxpayers. And in order to achieve the breakthrough from this situation, and in order for the taxpayers to deepen their understanding on the value of development or cooperation, it is essential for us to show the validation of the effectiveness of this tool. So this book consists of a series of books consists of 6 books. This is one of the ultimate goal that we would like to continue to pursue. And let me move on to the common interest, international public interest. The way development cooperation has been contributing to this aspect. And I believe Japan has made a considerable contribution to growth in Asia. And of course, ODA was just part of that through private and public partnership. This has been achieved. But I believe ODA also played a significant role in achieving this. And also some study shows that the ODA served as the catalyst to spur more private investment. So with the combination of private and public investment, it made a great contribution to the growth in Asia. And I believe Japan has the very effective aid model, such as the infrastructure development support using yen loan. So it has been Japan's signature aid model, and there were some skeptics by different countries. The aid and trade and investment, these three were the three pillars to instigate the growth in Asia. And donors who were skeptical about the yen loan now accept the value of loan program. So Japan has been very consistent in underscoring the importance of these three pillars. And some donor nations consider that the government should not be involved in the policy activities for other nations, but Japan has been consistent in its providing support in this aspect. And one thing I would like to underscore here is the aid model directly linked to government policy, the technical assistance and trade. But it's not just about the methodology of development cooperation, but really dig deeper into the models which are specializing in supporting the health and welfare and education. And these are some examples that are directly connected to the government policy, like Kaizen or continuous improvement program, and the maternal and child health handbook, and SHEP, and the disaster management and prevention, and the development corridor model. So, and also the human security was advocated. It's a basic norm in the diplomatic activity, and ODA played a significant role in that. And lastly, I like to also mention the South cooperation, and Japan was supporting this. And within the community of development cooperation, these are the important models and insights and know-hows that Japan has been able to contribute. And this will be mentioned later, but as Professor Sato always states, sorry.
Yes.
So once the developing nations reach the certain income level, then it's the end of our ODA activity, and it will start to give aid to other nations. So we were expecting that within 20th century, we would be finishing our development cooperation. But even the average GDP level is improving across the globe. But the ODA is just continue to increase and making more advancements rather than ceasing to exist. And the development cooperation norm has been shaken because we see more actors in this space. And also the existing norms in ODA has been questioned. So we will be exploring the new norm for 20th century ODA, and something similar to post-SDG discussion will take place for ODA aid model as well. And I believe that Japan can play a leading role in that conversation.
Yeah.
And as for the future ODA approach, in order to play a leading role in the upcoming conversation, These are the points that I would like to underscore. So we need to continue to sophisticate our aid model. In Asia, Japan made a great success, but in Asia, the model that we focus on 3 pillars, whether it can be also applicable to African nations, we don't have clear answer to that yet. And also, as I mentioned earlier, not just the aid as a means, but when it's linked to the government policy, how should it look like? As Professor Hirano states, it's not just about the ideal, but the model should be applicable to the policy science. And as important actor, Japan should continue to play the important role. This is what I expect to Japan and its ODA model. Due to time constraint, I already raised a key point that I would like to discuss in our panel discussion. Thank you for your kind attention.
Professor Kato, thank you very much indeed. Next, we'd like to move to the panel discussion. All the panelists, please come to the panelist stage and seats. Today, as panelists, we've invited Professor Kuroda Kazuo, Graduate School of Asia Pacific Studies, Waseda University, Professor Sato Jin, Department of Pioneering Asian Studies, Institute for Advanced Studies on Asia, the University of Tokyo, Professor Mine Yoichi, Executive Director, JICA Okata Research Institute, and Ms. Iwama Nozomi, Senior Deputy Director General, JICA Governance and Peacebuilding Department. The moderator will be Ms. Miyahara Chie, Director General, JICA Okata Research Institute. The floor is yours. Kato-san, thank you very much for the introduction. All the panelists, thank you very much for being with us today. Today, we have the authors of these 3 books. As we are slightly behind schedule, we'd like to spend 45 minutes for the panel discussion, and then we'd like to take questions for about 15 minutes. In the panel discussion, I'd appreciate it if you could share your findings as you wrote these books, as well as from the perspective of a looking back, as well as looking into the future for the ODA. As Dr. Tanaka, as well as Professor Kato, had a very informative remarks. At the opening remark of Dr. Tanaka, he talked about the measures, the ODA as a measure of diplomacy and co-creation. And Professor Kato talked about comprehensive historical review on the development cooperation and the national interest, as well as international public interest. We had a lot of implication from these remarks. And as we are reaching the 70th anniversary of the development cooperation, what we can see through from this history, that's what we'd like to consider together. Recently, we are seeing new schemes and technical assistance as well as ODA, and there are new emerging donors as well in this field. The international situation surrounding the development cooperation has been changing, and all the challenges around the world has been greatly fluctuating. And development cooperation, ODA, in the future, what should they be? What should they look like? And to the future, the message to the next generation of ODA providers, I'd appreciate if you could touch on these things in your talk. And Professor Sato, Professor Mide, and Ms. Iwama, in this order, we'd like to ask you to give some remarks, 5 minutes for each at the beginning. Without further ado, I'd like to ask Professor Kuroda for your remark. Thank you very much. My name is Kuroda of Waseda University. As I'm an expert in education, I wrote a book about the genealogy of the international education cooperation. the history, what happened in the past. That is the true meaning of describing what it is. But I'm not an expert in history itself, so through this opportunity, I'd like to talk about international educational cooperation and to position within the international community and society. As looking back the history of Japan's development cooperation, I'd like to think about this topic. And there are three approaches in the international society, how the international educational cooperation has been conducted, peace and experimentation, the development. From this perspective, I'd like to, I focused on my discussion in this book about international educational cooperation. And through this, I've identified a lot of things. And two things I'd like to highlight from findings is that activity of the international, how the international educational cooperation is political, has a political aspect. We'll be discussing the diplomacy a lot. Jen Naitoi, the researcher, talked about knowledge diplomacy in this field, diplomacy and international educational cooperation and research, how they are mutually intertwined and strengthening with each other. That's what the person highlighted. The partner companies to enhance the relationship with the partner company or to spread universal value such as peace, and to contribute these purposes, international educational cooperation have been offered and provided. From JICA's perspective, education may be tilted toward the development or the fairness and human rights, and these are highlighted as the major purposes, but in the past as well. For the sake of diplomacy and for the sake of peace, the international cooperation has been greatly highlighted. That is something I discovered or reconfirmed, if you will. Another thing I'd like to touch on is that global governance and the international educational cooperation, the mutual an interaction between these two. This is another finding. For example, John Tian, a conference conducted in 1980s, or EFA, Education for All, this gained momentum around the time. This was impactful, and that reshaped what it is in the public education in Japan. Japan has been subject to the impact coming from global governance, but not only that, vice versa. To the global governance, Japan can wield a great influence. I'm not sure whether that was significant, but at any rate, in 2002, in the summit, then Prime Minister Koizumi and the civil society of Japan, education for sustainable development is the concept proposed by these people, and in 2015 SDGs have been incorporated in this concept, and to achieve that, Japan has conducted a lot of diplomatic effort to make that happen. Of course, human security is one of the elements we'd like to touch on for the ODA across the board. But as Tanaka-san has touched on, the international agenda in the educational field has been proposed. So this is the mutual interaction or the interplay between these two factors. And based on these, the future of international cooperation by Japan, one thing I'd like to touch on is to make commitment to the global governance establishment. That's what we need in the future. And in doing so, not only peace, human rights, fairness, justice, and development, we need to take an integrated approach of these factors. Then human security, this concept itself is, I think, an integrated approach, if you will. So this is something we have to see more and more important. And in doing so, the national interest and international public interest, we need to pursue the harmonization and consistency between these. When we think about peace, for example, the peace in the Middle East is the public good or public interest, and that is the case for Japan as well. That would be national interest for Japan if we achieve the peace in Middle East. So for that to be achieved, we can think about coordinating and integrating national interest and international public interest. And the second one, entrepreneurial Japan, that is the human security is the related concept in the educational field as well. ESD should be emphasized as a model entrepreneur. Japan needs to play a role. Sorry, I ran out of time, but this is another important perspective I'd like to have. Dr. Tanaka touched about the Japan should the initiatives in this regard. take the initiative, and this is the direction we should be heading. And the next one is Japan as a nation with Asianism as fluctuating. Looking back the history, we've been cooperating with Asian countries to contribute to the world. That's what we've been doing for many times in the field of education. So this is another perspective we need to have. And also Japan as a platform for international cooperation. This relates to the international agenda in the educational field, for example, AUNCNet, the collaboration with the Southeast Asian countries in terms of a high degree of education. This is what we made successful as activities. And there are various examples that JICA accumulated over the years. So in that regard, what we should be in the future is the provider of the international public goods in global as well as regional, and ODA should be utilized going forward. That's it. Thank you. Professor Kuroda, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to hand it over to Professor Sato, International Development.
Thank you. This is Sato Jin, Professor at the Department of Pioneering Asian Studies of the University of Tokyo. So this is late in the afternoon, and the both speakers and the listeners must be tired. And in the handout, the answer to this quiz was already distributed. And if you have the answer, please do not look at this. So please fill out the boxes. One. The attitude of government in Africa against A sheds some interesting light on the misunderstanding about this country's aid. Africa neither shares a historical sentiment against this country, nor do they share any ethnic affinity. Country A's business in Africa has a similar outward orientation like those of Europe. As a result, criticism against Country A by African country is even stronger than those we see in Asia. So, due to conscious of time, I would like to be straight. So when I show this quiz, and the students often says that the country A is China, but actually country A is Japan. And this is from the book published in 1964 by John White. The book is called The Japanese Aid. So how people look at the donor changes over time. And I've seen this in my historical studies, and not just how it's viewed changes, but also it also changes significantly. So say Japan was supporting Thailand. And the Thailand was furious because the specific Japanese companies were benefiting from that. But when Thailand started to offer aid to Laos and other neighboring nations, and they changed their views. So this is how things change over time. And the change that I wanted to focus on is that the change in the characteristic of project. And in my study and book, I focused on how the problematic project in 1980s took its course. But the problematic project often ends in a very successful project, because those projects at issue back then, but no one really tracked down until the very end of those projects. And also JICA was facing the fierce criticism, but no one actually followed through what happened to those problematic projects. And it takes long years for any project to generate the benefit out of the project. So there's someone who really observed until the end of the project. So, why Darwin was successful in his study was as he was able to capture the changes in the long history. So we need to understand the long time horizon of this project in order to understand their significance. And when we think about the future ODA, the one way to understand ODA should be ODA. The ODA should be part of the post-war economic recovery, or a part of the formation of the liberal economic bloc, or a part of the national security policy, or a part of the national movement. And back in 1960, this is the cigarette box, and it's called the Peace. And the Overseas Corporation volunteer's name is printed on the box. So not in only the university education, but the using media, and also in terms of the generation of a role model. I believe the ODA should be further promoted as a part of the national movement. That's my view on this. Thank you.
Professor Sato, thank you very much. Next, I'd like to ask Professor Mine, written the oral history of development cooperation. Miyahara-san, thank you very much. My name is Mine. Not as the executive director of JICA, but the Research Institute, as I'd like to make comment as the author to this book. I wrote this book, The Oral History of Development Cooperation, Goto-san from the University Press of thank you very much, University of Tokyo Press, and thank you very much. And in preparation for this book, we had a lot of thorough discussions, and thanks to these efforts, we were able to make a good book. But I'm afraid it was very lengthy. And Professor Sato, by incorporating all of these things, I think it looks like a dictionary. So perhaps you should buy these books on Kindle. At any rate, please move to the next slide. And my volume relates the oral history as the name suggests. I asked the counterpart in the partner countries to talk about their experience about the cooperation with Japan to re-establish the past projects. For one thing, there are so many readers who have a lot of skills and experiences in ODA, so I didn't want to just sugarcoat the situation in ODA. Rather, I wanted to identify what were the things they experienced, the people in the partner countries, and I'd like to describe the authentic experiences they had. And I served as an interpreter between what we have and the people in the partner countries. I felt it was very effective to let them talk. So this is something I'd like to continue in some form. Why I think we should continue going forward as well. But on the other hand, in our book, we describe the project history as well. This is the perspective from the side of Japan to explain the efforts on the side of Japan. Recently, we are seeing a lot of comment from the partner countries, but this is where we'd like to highlight efforts on the side of Japan. And perhaps it could be regarded as a dialogue between the present and the past, and that will be forming history. And the dialogue between Japan and the local the partner countries will rebuild the history of ODA. And in that regard, the project history and oral history, these two can be regarded as a set in the description. While we are doing so, what I thought was an important thing is education. not only university education, but from elementary to junior high and high school educations. We need to get down to these levels to explain the history of ODA as an national campaign, not just about discussions among senior citizens, but also young people as well. And based on this oral history, 3 months ago in Aichi Prefecture, I had some lecture in front of the world history teachers of high schools, and as they are in charge of one of the mandatory subject of high school education, that is the general world history, they need to teach about world history in the related to Japan, and they struggle to give lecture about the subject. And to these world history teachers, I explained world history as well as the project history as well. What kind through that I received a very excellent feedback and reaction from these teachers to share the history of the year. So I think we can enter the field of education in this domain. Next page, please. As I'm running out of time, I'd like to move forward. And in the past, through interviews I've conducted for a loan or grant or technical transfer, the common approach of Japan is not to teach partner countries to fish by themselves, to how to fish themselves. That is the self-help efforts. And another approach is to train the trainer approach. So after they are learning how to fish, they can provide support from their side. And so this is the investment we can make from network. That is Japan's ODA has been focusing on, such as South-West cooperation. And there are a lot of experience accumulated that even Japan may not retain, but counterparts may retain these important experiences and insights on their own. And what we hear a lot is that Japan's assistance is different from the Western countries provide. That is the honest opinions I hear a lot from the counterparties. So self-help support, that is something we have to see further evolution. But in doing so, we need to retain this key concept. This can be put in different ways, but the self-help and highlighting self-help of the counterparts or partner countries, this is something we need to retain in the future development cooperation going forward, based on my experience. And lastly, human security. There are the countries with the technology handing down from such countries to the countries without technology. Rather than that, this human security should focus on the new philosophy of ODA, and this would be the important central challenge for us going forward. And human rights is one of the agenda we are faced with. But when we talk about human rights, the mother of human rights, France, the French Revolution is the starting point. So by talking about human rights, we are seeing enhancement of the position of France as a country, as it is the country of origin, but by contributing to the international public benefit, that will eventually enhance the position of Japan. I think that is the flow that we can achieve. And the human security, as well as the dignity of human, these concepts have been embedded into the core philosophy of the United Nations. And the concept of human security, the international discussion on this item should be led by Japan. And when that happens, we can be engaged in agenda setting, and that is the added value we should further recognize. So I should not talk so long, so I'd like to stop here. Thank you. Thank you very much. Last but not least, Ms. Yawama, please. Ms. Yawama, she's not one of the writers or authors for these book series, but she is a member of JICA, so please look back the history of ODA, what would be findings, and what would be the proposal for the future.
Thank you. This is Iwama from JICA Governance and Peace Building Department. So I feel like I was put into position with a very short period of preparation as opposed to those prominent panelists. But ODA has a lot of meaning, but whether they are instrument of diplomacy or contributions to the development community, they can only be persuasive if accompanied by actual project results. And I made the textbook for JICA stuff based on the reflection of 30 years history of JICA. And that's the never-ending approach. So JICA has always aiming to be a learning organization through its approach and quality improvement and evaluation. When I joined JICA and during 1980, the quantity of ODA was only increasing. But right now we're trying to focus on quality improvement, and also we are aiming to contribute to strategy and policy based on its knowledge from the field. And on the right hand side at the top, you see this cycle selecting the target region, nation, or project. And also this connects to human resource development and nation building. And then after that, we will reach the stage to achieve the policy goals. But during the selection phase of the country or region or area, we prioritize a strong policy focus. But many JICA staff members focus on understanding the historical background of the country's sectors and issues and the current problems in the individual cooperation stage. And while understanding the risks that things may not go according to the plan, but there's a strong sense that the assistance will not yield a result unless it is designed with respect for the challenges and initiatives of the partner country. And based on my not very long 30 years experience, we are also often involved in historical phases and national projects in the country, which gives us a sobering thought. And I was involved in supporting the drafting of civil code for Vietnam, and as one of the example, we offer support for the reconstruction from disasters and conflicts with a strong sense of responsibility. And most recently, we have engaged in COVID-19 countermeasures with sense of urgency. And as Dr. Tanaka mentioned, the experience of Thailand and Eastern Seaboard is being referred to for the support in other countries such as Bangladesh, and also in the northern region of Vietnam, centered on Hanoi, is developing as a destination for foreign direct investment, and it's leading to the improvement of logistics. And the Delhi Metro is also famous for expanding women's spheres of activity, aiming to reduce traffic congestion and CO2 emissions and improve technical capabilities of local general contractors. And it led to support for urban railroad in other Indian cities, such as urban railway development in Dhaka. And for the future of development cooperation, there are 3 points. ODA is already just a small part of the flow of funds to developing countries, and the challenge is how to make sure that funds flow normally to developing countries, not just ODA funds. And Development should be used for areas where public intervention is needed to unleash a country's potential and increase its resilience to ensure the human security of its people. And as Dr. Tanaka mentioned, the development issues are coming closer to one another. And areas where national interests and the interest of recipient countries and international interests overlap should be expanded. And also, we have just started a collaboration with the Interpol, which seems less familiar with development agenda, in support related to measures against international financial crimes, such as SNS fraud, among others, of which there are many victims in Japan. There's a large potential for growth in co-creation, including collaboration with the private sector, civil society and foundations, university, and local governments. So the DAC uses the term trust deficit to discuss the loss of trust from developing countries, and there's still room for JICA to leverage its relatively high trust to provide a forum for dialogue with developing countries and to take advantage of its value. On the other hand, it is necessary to work tirelessly on the management of projects that bring about trust. Professor Sato talked about how we keep track of the problematic project and also how to utilize the oral history in our study was also mentioned by Dr. Mine. In addition, Japanese-style development cooperation and social innovation was supervised by management scholar Dr. Nonaka and summarizes the process of social transformation through 7 projects focusing on management. This may sound oversimplifying, but here's what we're going to have to achieve in all of the projects that we engage in. That is, Japanese parties involved draw out the other party's strengths through trial and error, co-create and overcome crises, and solve social issues, and foster trust as a byproduct. We must work on how we can reproduce this in different environments with different budget and different size of project. A thrilling and fascinating world awaits us all as we work to build trust while feeling the touch of contemporary history. We look forward to the participation of like-minded people. Thank you.
Biziwama, thank you very much. So what JICA is doing and what we've identified as challenges for the last 70 years of activities. Thank you very much for that. And later we are going to have the crosstalk, but we are running out of time. We are behind schedule, so we'd like to be concise. But people joining online, you can use a Q&A, and people joining at the venue, you have a piece of paper in your desk. So if you raise that hand, the staff members will be taking your questions. The first one, as we discussed the national interest and international public interest as well as international public goods. These are what we discuss a lot, so we'd like to have deeper discussion. First, Professor Kuroda, the political aspect of ODA leading to the national benefit, national interest, but further than that, there's an international public good, and global governance has been led by Japan. That is the international trend we are seeing. I think that is a contribution we can identify. On this point, what's your observations? And to you, what are specific international public goods you have in mind? Please finish your comments in 2 or 3 minutes if you can. Thank you. First, what I mentioned as a political aspect is that the political aspect, not only for the national interest of Japan, but in the international public interest, the peace is one of the important factors. And ODA has been tilted toward the development or human rights and fairness. These are the criteria we use to assess the ODA. But what I wanted to say is that for the sake of peace itself, of course, this has been something on our mind for a long time, but as a system, the peace as a system, that needs to be looked into. For example, preventive diplomacy, there's a concept, and preventive measures, we can make good use of diplomacy or development cooperation. In theory, as well as in practice, we need to assess and verify the effectiveness of this measure. That's what I wanted to say. The images of the global governance, the two examples I mentioned is that to show the model, as Dr. Tanaka mentioned, that the international agenda and agenda set, these are the great contribution they can make, ESG or human security for both concepts, to show the model and philosophy to the international society. And that should be supported by providing ODAs as well. Unfortunately, ESG has been successful, but not closely related to the human security, it is, but as a role of development cooperation to show the models and philosophy and to let them embed it in the society. That's one contribution we can make. And the other thing is to do network building or platform, if you will, to build networks in various manners, regionally or globally. That is where we can identify a most sustainable contribution. The global governance, the regional governance frameworks needs to be established. That is where we should utilize ODA. That's what we are asked to do in the future. Thank you. You talked about a great effective future ODA model based on what you mentioned. Networks and platforms, as you touch on these, our partner countries or emerging countries and ODAs, I'd like to dig deep in these topics. Professor Mine, you've been doing a project with African countries for a long time, and in your experiences, the emerging countries, partner countries, we talked about the national interest and international public interest, and what are your observations and what are things we need to aware in developing models? Yes, Professor Min, yes, 2 or 3 minutes. Just briefly, as Professor Kato mentioned, the national interest should be at the core, but at the same time, in Malawi, and we say the Malawian people to say we here because we for the sake of Japan's national interest, that would not be something appropriate. And also the maximization of interest is, of course, a task required for its sector. However, with that being said, the companies need to contribute to the society and also to generate profit. They need to think about approaches and methods, if you will, and that varies. In that regard, African people, young people in Africa, including entrepreneurship, they are full of energy and vitality. And as we get along with them, I think this is exactly what we should take in and get back to the energy. I think that's some of the byproducts we can expect from the relationship between these countries. And from various expertise we are working at our institute, but the business administration or organizational theory or in enabling innovation, we need to have some the theory to achieve a universality. These are something we need to set up an organization to work it smoothly. I think that's one of the challenges I have in mind. Thank you. Next, Ms. Iwama, I'd like to ask you a question. When we do our job, we think about the international public interest in terms of infrastructure support. That is, of course, related to national interest, but it is also effective in providing benefit to the receiving countries. But as a practitioner, the national interest and the international interest, how do you think about this? I'd appreciate your observations in your work. That's what I'd like to ask for your opinions.
Thank you. Conventionally, the issues that we addressed with the ODA and the global diplomatic agenda are coming closer to one another in these days. And when I was young, I was never paid attention to what is going on in the discussion of G20 because the development was not the part of the agenda, but the climate change and many global issues, this development assistance become part of the important agenda in the global stage. And when we become too competitive and too exclusive, sometimes we struggle. But if we try to find commonalities and try to expand that involving developing nations, that is the important part, things that we need to do. But if we say try to promote international public interest, but from the developing countries, they feel like they are put to the second priority because for the in our fight against climate change, sometimes developing nations are reluctant to engage in such effort. So when we consider the global norm right now, but we need to think about the effective approach that work well with the developing nations. I hope this answer to your question.
Thank you very much to expand views and the perspective from business administration. And as I read this book on history, the development cooperation involves a lot of people inside and outside Japan. And I think passion led to the resultant success and sustainable practice. And experts and the volunteers and all the staff members, they gain the trust of the recipient countries, and that will be contributing to the national interest and international interest. And I'd like to ask Professor Sato, and you are engaged in the research on the trust and development cooperation. What are the clues that we can gain from this perspective?
So I was skipped very naturally, so thank you for setting aside the difficult question for me. And when I was listening to Professor Sato, it gave me a food for thought. And I talked about the time frame, and today we're talking about international public goods and interest. And when we try to map that out in the long time frame, it give us a good point to think about. During the course of the project, and at what point in the public interest appears, and then in which timing it brings benefit to the relevant parties. So when we bring this down to the ground at the level, I think we need different narratives depending on the types of stakeholders. Say, on the ground, I never met someone who talks about the national interest, and we also need to put these into our action. So in order to incentivize different stakeholders, we need to think about what should be the effective narrative. Say it's a government official, there's a narrative that is effective for them. And if we're reaching out to ordinary people in rural villages, and there are different narratives that we need to prepare. So with that in mind, and depending on the time frame and in a different phase, we need to think about the characteristics of different international public interest. So rather than starting our discussion from international public interest, but we need to think about, with this concept, we need to think about what are the actionable things that we can implement on the ground. So theoretically, of course, it's important to define national interest and international public interest, but all these makes no sense if we lack actionable insights. So sorry, I didn't touch on trust. No, it's okay.
Yes, the key words today includes trust, and as the 70th anniversary of ODA, what we built was a great trust. And in ASEAN countries, when we conduct questionnaire, Japan is said that we are the most trusted country on the globe. So from that regard, trust is something I touched on. Related to trust, if I may, I'd like to ask Professor Kuroda. Yes, when we think about educational cooperation as described in the book, one key word is soft power. And against the soft power approach, knowledge diplomacy on the other side. And they are in a way on the extreme. Soft power, if you will, is a power approach. That is, to expand soft power, the process itself has become an end itself, but rather knowledge diplomacy involves a mutual interaction. For example, when you receive international students or send students outside Japan, that will be very important to enhance trust. But that should not be just regarded as expansion of soft power, just receiving or sending out students. That will not lead to the great trust between these two countries. Perhaps we can contribute to the some benefit, but that would not lead to the trust. To build trust, you need to pay attention to the mutual relationship. In various forms, not setting one definite target, we can come up with the various things as we go along. And I think people on the ground are very important. Ms. Yuama-san message to the young generation, you touched on that. In Professor Kuroda, Professor Sato, Professor Mine, you communicate with the younger generation every day. One message to them, if you could, starting from Professor Mine. A message to the youth. Well, I think there are lots of discussion points, but the book, what was most significant is the traditional, important factor in Japan's system is to focus on self-help, and that is, I think, what we are seeing, working properly. I think there are a lot of ways to put this, but self-help support, this is the fundamental aspect that we should not forget in the future as well. That is something we should continue going forward. But human resource development and national development, as well as the interaction of minds and hearts, as we provide support, we can make friends with the receiving parties and counterparts in a face-to-face interaction. That is the case with the relation between teachers and students. When my former student joined JICA, and if he or she comes to me and share that I would feel delighted. So I think the relationship between people will be generated in the self-help effort in a cliched way, but I think that is exactly we need to cherish the treasure going forward. Thank you very much. Professor Sato?
Yes, rather than give a message to younger people, but what is important is what we do. So it makes me we need to make this space exciting and interesting for younger people. So the news is always featuring Otani Shohei, and it's also the soft power to inspire younger people. That young people are really admiring his achievement, and like Ogata Sadako and other prominent people who were the role models and who have been admired. We may not be able to be them. However, we ourselves need to make this space attractive.
Professor Kuroda, in that regard, Sato-san has already mentioned what I wanted to say. But the field of ODA, some said that we are in a declining industry, but I don't think so, actually. In terms of money and scale, perhaps we are declining, but when we take a look at the global situations, the development cooperation is a growing industry across the globe. SDGs or 2030 framework, the discussion that has already started and going forward. These are the challenges we need to globally address, and we need to create a governance structure to address these challenges. And there will be jobs to be done and hopes as well for the younger generation. Therefore, how we can evolve ourselves from just providing the vertical assistance to developing countries, but to enter into the international cooperation to play a role in global governance establishment, and how Japan can contribute to that. So that is the shift we need to enable, and how we can do that. That is exactly something we need to show to our younger generation as a hope, and that is the challenges we are faced with. Thank you. Thank you very much for your inspiring comments, and we'd like to spend the remaining time for Q&A. A question to Professor Mine. The characteristics of Japan's development cooperation is related to human resources development and infrastructure-related assistance. How it is utilized, so infrastructure support and human resources development, are they treated separately? Are they totally different two things? Okay, that's a tough question, but with regard to infrastructure, yes, in my book Oral History, are related to young loans as well. But to do this in a sustainable manner, the users need to be delighted to pay, and we need to gather money to make it happen. So people on the ground in the country need to do it on their own. And if we can establish the cycle, we can say success story, and this will lead to the next success case, and they will acquire their ownership. That's how it works. People on the ground, for example, and what we need to pay attention to is that how money flows people on the ground. Perhaps people need to have the skin in the game, and projects that would lead to that area is something where we can receive appreciation, or we can see sustainability and successful technical transfer cases. That's what I think.
And from the practitioner point of view, Iwama-san, please. Yes, but I think these are the same, two sides of the same coin. They cannot be separated. For an example, in Ho Chi Minh, the metro organized gave training to Jakarta MRT, and the people from Jakarta gave training to Dhaka. So for the urban railroad, until the actual kickoff, it's difficult to project the passenger flow. So in Japan, it was too long ago when we first opened the subway operation. So they can share their knowledge on the ground. So it was very effective. And also for Delhi Metro, the Indian local general constructor accumulate their knowledge around the project management and construction. And for the subsequent project, they have been supporting the other nations and other cities. So this kind of knowledge sharing and knowledge rollout has been very important. So the talent development and capability development, human resource development is also important. Yes, I believe these cannot be separated. And if I may move on to the next question.
In recent international development, the private sectors play an important role in doing so. Practitioners and researchers, what are the roles and how it will be changing, how it should be in the future? This is another question on this point. Professor Sato. From the roles of researchers, yes, roles of practitioners and researchers, how it will be changing with increasing number of actors, I think. Well, how should I say this? Historically speaking, in the past, I think there were so many researchers staying away from assistants. They don't like assistants. Many regional researchers, there are so many people like that. And from outside, there are a lot of comments made outside in assistants. But in recent years, there are many people who are mesmerized in this industry, getting along with this field. And of course, there are pros and cons about this. But in various ways, we need to get closer and closer, and otherwise perhaps we see a limited resource. I think that may be the situation. But when that happens, we are not seeing good metabolism, if you will, not so many new people coming into this field. So roles of researchers, how we can continuously let young people flowing into the industry, how we can create a cyclone system is something we need to consider going forward. Perhaps that is something I think relatively handled by researchers. Perhaps there's some leeway for researchers rather than JICA members.
And in the space of education, we have a Education Cooperation Week, and the NGO and the consultants and researchers are involved to discuss education. So we have been building this kind of discussion network. But even before that, the different people and stakeholders have been very close and being cooperative within the education sector. And if we roll this out to our global network, then maybe it's a good way for Japan to suggest a new platform for the discussion on education. So say international norms will appear from there, and that establishing such network is something that is required from us, and not limited to Japan, but expanding that to global is also very important.
Thank you very much. As we are running out of time, I'd like to take the final question. And Professor Mine. In the traditional Japanese assistance, the Japan faced the visible and shared experiences of Japan to the developing countries. That was highlighted, but in the future, we need to focus on the emerging countries out of assistance, and we need to share the experiences to other countries. And JICA Research Institute, the supporting emerging countries and collaborating with the institute in these countries, how you can share these experiences to contribute to LDC cooperation. Is that something you're engaged in, and have you had the research plan for such things? So I'd like to refer to what this question refers to, but as Professor Ono has been serving as the head, and he talked about translative adaptation in the discussion. And to translate Western experience into the Japanese development cooperation, and that experience our experience has been translated into and applied into other countries, and a new donor country is trying to share their experience to other countries. I think this is the overall network, and I think that is how we can conduct research. And as Dr. Tanaka talked about, a Professor Kanata, Professor Shimura, and a Dr. Junpei summarized the history of Japan's ODA in English, but the authors are not only Japanese, but people from across the globe. And the book was written in English, but ODA takers have become diversified, and the relationship and the practitioners and researchers, not only that, but private sectors and companies, not only stakeholders in Japan, but also in other countries, we can get together to disseminate the Japanese style, Japanese model, not summarized by the Japanese people, but I think that is something we'd like to do together with many people across the globe going forward. Professor Kuroda?
So I talked about the Asian is Japan in the transforming Asia. So Japan made a great success, although we're lost 3 decades, and East Asia is now rising. But East Asian nations, including Japan, have been making a great progress in our economy. So JICA is leading the graduate university study for development cooperation. So using the experiences of the successful nation after the war, that's the content that Japan can leverage. And also by the book by Professor Shimomura, he mentioned that not just the profit involvement of Japan, but in the miracle of East Asia, it was highlighted, and that is a great asset that Japan has been contributing to the Asian nations and the global nation. So that's something that we can continue to do for the future.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Any other comments? So it's time to close the panel discussion. We'd like to conclude the panel discussion. Thank you very much for inspirational comments. And in JICA, a research institute, we'd like to think about the new development model, as well as new initiatives and activities and assistance that Japan needs to offer going forward on an intellectual level. Studies needs to be further pursued going forward. Thank you very much. With that, we'd like to conclude today's forum. All the participants, panelists, thank you all very much for being with us today.